I've got two this week that we can go through that were suggested last week. You make sure. Yes, Mike.
Sorry, I was thinking about this classes last week, and one of the things that I guess we overlook is the fact that even non-Christians will tell you that the Bible is the best documented ancient document in the world.
Yes, that's true.
There is no other document where you can get more than one description of the individual. They take the word of some of the ancient philosophers and what have you as fantastic. These are men who knew it all. But all we have is somebody talking about what somebody else told them about somebody who's been dead for hundreds of years, in most cases. But the Bible has first-hand accounts and several accounts of a lot of events in the Bible.
Yes.
I think that being the case, the whole concept of error, or the nature of our class here, is ludicrous.
How long has the Bible been around? Oh, Bob will get to you in just a second. How long has the Bible been around? How long have we had the old scriptures? Think about it. Think about this historically. When did the Israelites come out of Egypt? About 1500 BC. It's not an exact date, it's an approximation, but that's 1,500 years before the coming of Christ generally. When they came out of Egypt, Moses went up on Mount Sinai, which was where God gave him the law. At that point, they began writing down the law. So at some point after that, they had the Torah. Other parts of the Old Testament, what we call the Old Testament, were written later, of course. They had to be lived out historically. 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Chronicles are all books of history that happened to and with the Israelites in the centuries that followed. When were the Psalms written about? When did David live? About 1000 BC. So we've got the Psalms from that point. And then, of course, the prophets came about the 8th century BC. That'd be in the 700s, and from there up until about 400 BC. So we've got all these writings that we've had from those original dates. And then Jesus came on the scene, and the Gospels were written. The epistles, the New Testament letters were written, the book of Revelation, everything in the New Testament was written in the first century. So we've had all these documents for all those hundreds of years. If they had as many problems with them that people allege, do you think the Bible would still be a bestseller? And yet it remains a bestseller. Has any book had more persecutors? Has any book had more detractors? And really, if you think about it, has any collection of writings had more opportunity for there to be blatant, glaring error than a book written over about 1,500 years by about 40 different men in several different locations, and yet the Bible remains solid and intact? Do you think you could get that to happen today if you took 40 different people and had them write down supposedly factual information? Of course, you do it today. What's that? It'd be hard with two or three. And yet, over the years, the Bible has maintained its integrity. So, Mike, you make a very good point. Bob?
Oh, last week I said that they tried Jesus at night, but against the law. I have something I'd like to read.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
And I'm talking of verse 26:57.
Okay. Matthew 26:57.
Yeah. We learned that Jesus was taken first to Ananias, former high priest, father-in-law, and to see if he was bound to see if his house. The conspiracy was well planned, so that the scribes and the elders and the Sanhedrin had gathered at Caiaphas' house ready to try Jesus. The time was sometime between midnight and the first rooster crowing. Such a hearing was illegal on several counts. Criminals were not to be held at night, and trials in the capital cases could only be held at the temple and only in the...
Okay.
They did, they already had it prejudged at night, and the Sanhedrin and the high priest, but they had to wait till the next day to take him, so they couldn't do that at night legally.
Okay. So all that stuff was done, of course, illegal. I'm sure everybody would agree with that, based on the whole idea of the crowd, the thugs being sent to arrest him and brought in.
And what they done was illegal. The high priest and the Sanhedrin was the Supreme Court of the Israelites, so they done everything wrong. They knew that wait till the next day to formally charge.
Which is terribly ironic, since they were the people who should have been the most righteous in the world.
Yeah, sure.
Right. All right, I did make a couple of observations this week, and I tend to, now that I'm teaching this class, see these things perhaps a little more often than I did before. For example, last week, glad to see you're feeling better, Velda. It was announced about you that you were sick. And what did Steve say? Anybody hear what Steve said? Steve said, Velda, whom we all know. Do we all know Velda? Apparently not. Do you think there might have been a few people in the auditorium that didn't know her? Now, would you please tell us your name? Yes.
Beverly Osmond?
Yes, you're Beverly.
Yes.
Does she look like Velda? I think she does. I think she does, but she's not Velda, is she? So somebody might look at Velda. What? There's Beverly. Oh no, but that's Velda. Oh, that's Velda. No, that's Beverly. And then there's what Steve said last week. Yeah. Well, I was. Oh, Ellen's not here this morning, is she? I'm not trying to create confusion. I'm trying to illustrate how there could be confusion. But Steve also said, Velda, whom we all know. And it occurred to me, well, there's probably a couple of people in this auditorium who don't know Velda. But is it inaccurate, or is it wrong, or was Steve out of place to say, Velda, whom we all know? I don't think so, because generally speaking, we all know who Velda is. Sometimes even preaching, I'll get up there and I'll say, now we all know this. When I know good and well, probably there's at least one person out there that doesn't know what I'm about to say. And so I try not to say things like that, but I still do from time to time.
You say Velda, whom we all know is those that know Velda, what you're referring to. Those that don't know Harrison, it's imperfect.
I didn't catch all that.
And you say about Velda Rogers,
Yes.
whom we all know, those that know Velda, that's perfect to them. Those that do not know Velda, it's not perfect to them.
Okay, right. That makes good sense.
What's the conflict of that? I don't understand.
Well, the all. When someone says all of us know her, and somebody's sitting out there and says, well, I don't know her. So all is inaccurate. And Steve should not have said all. But we understand, no, you can say all, even if it doesn't mean every single one.
It goes back to the thing, these are idioms or sayings.
Yes.
You said we've done it 1,000 times. What's the difference between that and all? Well, that's a nice way of saying most of you might ought to know, I should know, but there might be someone who don't, but that's not as polite to say. All you people that know, and by the way, the rest of you should know.
Right. Amen. It's accommodative language because we don't want to. How would you like to have to be absolutely perfectly specific in everything you said? It would drive you nuts after a while. What do we call? What's that? It already has driven us crazy. What do we call it when the sun comes up in the morning? We call it a sunrise. Is it actually a sunrise?
No.
It's an earth roll. That's what it is. Did you see that beautiful earth roll this morning? Because that's what allows us to see the sun. The earth is rolling and we rotate towards the sun. Well, it's an earth roll. That's not a sunrise. And it's the same thing in the evening. We're just rolling the opposite way. Did you see that negative earth roll? Because the sun does not go down. But we speak accommodatively. If somebody bakes a big platter of cookies and they come back and somebody has eaten 2/3 of those cookies, and someone asks the question, who ate all the cookies? Well, of course, Bobby's pointing to Jim. Jim would be the one who... And the point is not who ate them. The point is, were all the cookies eaten? Well, we know all the cookies. There's a whole third of them left. But if they asked the question, who ate all the cookies, we know exactly what they meant. So sometimes we use words like that. Also, this caught my attention because we happened to live in Bedford, Virginia for 6 years, worked with the church there. Great little town, marvelous place to live. If you ever want a place to retire, stay here. But my brother was getting out of the service while we were living in Bedford, and he said, well, I don't know, I'm getting out of the service. I got to figure out where I'm going to live for the rest of my life. I said, man, you need to come down here and check out Bedford. He did, and he bought a place in Forest, about a 20-minute drive from Bedford, but he loved that part of the country, and they're still there and happy. But I'm digressing. If someone said that they built the D-Day Memorial in Bedford because Bedford lost 21 men in the invasion at Normandy, that would be an absolute historic fact. Per capita, the little town of Bedford lost more men in the invasion than any other town in the United States. So they decided when they were going to build this memorial, the D-Day Memorial, that they would build it in Bedford. However, how many men did I say? I said 21, didn't I? You know, they only lost 19. Well, okay, here's what happened. 19 men were killed on the beaches of Normandy. 2 men died the next day from the wounds they received on that day. So how many men? 21. 21. But if somebody said 19, would you argue with them? 19 men died that day. Well, 21 men died as a result. And so you can see how when you get the historic reports back, you might see a distinction or a differentiation between those two numbers when actually both accounts are true. It's just depending on how you report it. All right. I think those are all the observations I was making. But I would encourage you to do this same thing. Just make some notes about things you see from day to day that could be construed different ways, but the different ways that they're construed are both accurate. Do you remember, Jennifer, were you in here when I talked about you? Yeah, you were here. I saw you coming across the parking lot, and you had in one arm your pizza, and the other arm you had Joe Ree. How many people remember me talking about that? Okay, if somebody said, I saw Jennifer coming in and she had a pizza, and somebody else, well, I saw her coming in and she had Joe Ree. Which was she carrying? Well, she was carrying both. And that kind of stuff's going on all the time. Where are we? Oh, hey, let's get to Elijah. And how long did it not rain? Go to 1 Kings. Let's see where my notes are here. I think we're going to 17:1. Yes, 1 Kings. You got something before 17, Bob?
No.
Okay. 1 Kings 17:1. Now Elijah the Tishbite, who was of the settlers of Gilead, said to Ahab, as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, surely there will be neither dew nor rain these years, except by my word. Does he give a number of years here? He does not give a number of years here, but he does say years. There will be neither dew nor rain these years except by my word. The word of the Lord came to him, saying, go away from here and turn eastward and hide yourself by the brook Cherith, which is east of the Jordan. It shall be that we will drink of the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to provide for you there. I'm not questioning God's means of provision, but how would you like to eat food that the ravens brought to you? Okay, just a thought there. Nevertheless, if the Lord provides it, it'll be good. It'll be fine. Said it happened after a while. How long of a while? It doesn't say how long of a while, but after a while the brook dried up because there was no rain in the land. Then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and stay there. Behold, I have commanded a widow there to provide for you. So, he tells Ahab there's not going to be any rain. It's going to be a matter of years. He goes to the brook Cherith. He's there for a while. We don't know how long. And after that brook dries up, God says, go to the widow of Zarephath and stay there. She'll provide for you. I provided her to provide for you. So that's where we're going to leave that at the moment, but hold on to those things. And then we go to chapter 18, verse 1. Now it happened after many days that the word of the Lord came to Elijah the third year, saying, go, show yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the face of the earth. What year was it? It was the third year. Now hold on to that idea. In the New Testament, there are several references to this historic occurrence. One of them that we touched on a couple of weeks ago in a sermon was in James. So if you go to James chapter 5, and if you look at verse 17 of James 5, it says, Elijah was a man with a nature like ours, and he prayed earnestly that it would not rain, and it did not rain on the earth for 3 years and 6 months. All right, that's what it says in James. Jesus also said as much, 3 years and 6 months. So we've got New Testament affirmation of the 3 years and a half, 3 years and 6 months. What detractors are saying is that from 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 1, if Elijah came to Ahab, or if the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the third year, that's only 2 years, and then the beginning of that next year is the third year. And so they're saying that this was only 2 years and something, because this is in the third year. Could there be a resolution for this? And you get down to verse 41, and we see by verse 41, I believe it is, Elijah's predicting a heavy shower, and it came very shortly thereafter. Sometimes it's almost as hard to see what they're saying the problem is as it is to see what the resolution is. But they're claiming that since this was in the third year, in chapter 18, verse 1, that the whole thing could not have been 3.5 years. It was resolved before the third year was out, is what they're claiming. Any comments or observations on this before I get started? I see 3 possible resolutions, and I don't know which one it might be, but if there are 3 possibles, what does that mean there is not? There is not a definite contradiction. Wait a minute, what am I doing? I was supposed to, oh no, this is one of those, right. Forget that I startled myself. I thought, for a second, I thought this was one from the list on the website, not one of the 2 that we were given last week. But this is one of those 2 that we were given last week. Number 1, possible resolution number 1. Last September, I turned 57. So how old am I? I'm 57. If I were to say I'm in my 57th year, would that be inaccurate? Yes and no. We've got 2 answers. How would it be inaccurate?
You're fixing to turn in a few months.
Yes. I'm fixing to turn 58. That's the way we say it in Oklahoma. Fixing to turn 58. But am I 58?
No.
No, I'm 57. So it's not just a matter of semantics, but there are some semantics involved. So when the text says that in the third year the word of the Lord came to Elijah, could it be that it's been 3 years? For example, if you went to Elijah at that point and said, Elijah, how long has it been? Would he say 2 years or would he say 3 years?
Depending on the day of the month.
Okay, if you want to get technical about the day and the month. But if it's in the second year, has it been 2 years? If it's in the second year, could you even call that 3 years? See, what I'm looking at here is that this could be saying to us that in the third year, if I turn 57 and I told you I'm 57, I'm in my 57th year of life, and I would say it that way because while I'm not yet in my 58th year of life, although technically, I think is what Johnny's looking at, I am working on my 58th year, but I'm not 58. Don't rush me. I'm 57. Mike.
Well, I'm trying to see where the conflict is. The conflict is between chapter 18, verse 1 and what we read in James.
Yes.
Correct? James says 3 years and 6 months.
Yes.
Correct? And this translation on chapter 18, verse 1 says, after a long time, in the third year. Now, 6 months into the third year would be in the third year, would it not be?
That makes sense to me. For example, if you went to them and said, how long have you had a drought? Well, if it's 2 years working on the third year, would they say 3 years or would they say 2 years? I'm working on my 58th year, but if you ask me how old I am, how old am I going to say? I'm going to say 57. So how long have you had, yeah. Unless you're 12 and it's 12 and a half, or it's 12 and 3 months. 15 and a half. So, but when you get past about 25 or so, it's like, yeah. Yes, this is the New American Standard, 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 1. Now it happened after many days that the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the third year, saying, go show yourself to Ahab, and I'll send rain on the face of the earth. How long would they have had drought at that time? See, there's another question. Is this the third year since the proclamation that there would be no rain, or is this the third year of the drought? What's that? It's more than 2, but is it 3? It's not 3 until when? It's not 3 until you come around the third time to the date when you started, and you're working on the 4th, and then it's been 3 years. This is the third year of our drought. We might say after it's been 3 years.
Time spent between the time he was told to go and he actually got there to see him.
Yes. We don't know exactly how much time has passed. And here's another thing. The reason I read down through verse 9, I think it was in chapter 17, about going to the widow of Zarephath. If you read this as a whole text in its context, he goes to the widow of Zarephath and stays with her and her family. And that's what we read about until we get right down to verse 24. As a matter of fact, at the end of chapter 17, verse 24, this is where the widow of Zarephath is saying, I know you're a man of God because you raised my son from the dead, which is what Elijah did there. And then it says in chapter 18, now it happened after many days that the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the third year. Third year of what? It doesn't say. Is this a third year of drought, the third year without rain? Or is this the third year after he started living at the widow's house there in Zarephath? It's not terribly clear. What the point is, I don't think God worries about giving us all the details up front. I believe he expects us to take things on faith. And it says, I'm telling you, it's not going to rain. And it's not going to rain for 3 years. Historically, this is what happened. This is what the record says. Are we going to argue about the semantics and try to make it inaccurate by saying that this claim doesn't jive with that claim, when in fact there are ways to substantiate both claims together, to reconcile them? Johnny.
Another thing that I think I learned in the past is that the Jews sometimes they would count days in the sense that if they started a project on Saturday, well, let's say Monday, they started a project on Monday, and then they worked on it part of Monday and part of Tuesday, and just a little bit on Wednesday. So, they got started late on Monday. I mean, even if it was late, like Monday afternoon, worked all day Tuesday, and worked Wednesday morning. Is that 3 days work?
Might not have been 3 days work, but it was 3 days.
But to the Hebrews, to the Jews, that was 3 days.
But was it 3 24-hour periods? And what you're saying is what we would understand and have no questions with under normal circumstances. Say you got a project in your backyard at your house, at your back house. We've got a front house and a back house. That's what rich people have, front house and back house. That's like you got a BMW or a Porsche. Is it a front Porsche or a back Porsche? We've got both. They're small. If you got a project in your backyard at your house, say you're building a fire pit, and you come home from work, and you go out to the backyard, and you start where you work for a couple hours Monday, and then a couple hours on Tuesday, and then you skip Wednesday evening, of course, because you're going to be faithful to come to Bible class, right? Right? Okay. I'm asking for commitment here. Snuck it in on you, didn't I? And then Thursday you go back and you work on it again on Thursday evening, and then you kind of take Friday off and Saturday. And so Sunday comes and you go to church, and somebody says, hey, what have you been doing? So all last week I've been working on this fire pit in the backyard. Would it be wrong to say that? No. Because you spent how much time? A lot of time. A significant amount of your time. So we understand what it is when someone says, all last week I was trying to do that. I was trying to get a hold of you all last week. Somebody ever say something like that to you? And you go, you really? For 24 hours every single day? You were trying, we know they don't mean that. And so when we read things like this, I can't wait until Judgment Day when God gathers people together who are picking and tearing this stuff apart and saying, really? You really wanted that much more? Look around at the universe and tell me I don't exist? Look around at the people that you know and love and how life comes into this world, and you tell me that there is no God and that you don't think this book is for me? How do you figure that the Jews have lasted as long as they have with all the persecution they've endured? Can't you see that those were my people originally? And then I brought the church into existence, and as long as the church has been persecuted, it's still going strong, and my word is still predominant throughout the world. Not only is it predominant, there's no better way to live. Can't you see the people who lived as Christians had better lives than anybody else on the planet? People who really lived Christianity. Now you can pick the worst examples of everything, but who really does that? If you Google, what's the best car made? I'd probably say a Rolls Royce. How many of you would agree with that? I don't know. What would be your best car? Pick any best car made and Google, what am I looking for? Google somebody, complaints about a Rolls Royce. You think you'll find somebody who's got complaints about a Rolls Royce? Oh yeah, probably so. Does that mean Rolls Royce is not the best car in the world? What are you going to do? Measure complaints? Well, last time you had a Rolls, did you have any trouble with it?
Google Yugo.
They do what?
Google Yugo.
Google Yugo, yeah.
Hey, we got one in our backyard.
What this comes down to is, It's not absolutely specific in the Old Covenant exactly how long this drought was, but the New Testament clears it up for us. Jesus said it was 3.5 years. James said it was 3.5 years. And nobody that I know of in that culture, in that society, ever came back and said, hey, wait a minute, Jesus, you've misspoke here. It wasn't 3.5 years, it was 3 years, or it was less than 3 years. Didn't seem to be any problem with that. They understood that the historical account was accurate, even though some might criticize it and find fault. I think those were all three. It was the third year in that it had been 3 years, and we're in the third year of our drought. Not working towards the third year, but in the third year of our drought. Number two, it was the third year of the drought, not just the third year since the proclamation that there would be no rain, because the drought doesn't start until you've gone a few months without rain. We're familiar with that. Or it might have been the third year of his sojourn with the widow of Zarephath. So there's three possible answers. Any other discussion or comment on this? I thought we'd just fly through this one, and I've made it longer than it probably should have been. All right, Esther talks about Haman's 10 sons being hanged, so let's look at Esther. And this is in chapter 9. I don't know how familiar you are with the account of Esther, but this takes place after the Israelites have gone into captivity, and Esther is made queen over Persia. And Haman is a bad guy, and he wants to annihilate all the Jews. We've heard that story before. The first one he wants to get rid of is Esther's uncle, who is Mordecai. So in order to get rid of him, Haman plans Mordecai's downfall and builds a gallows in his backyard, 75 feet high, because he wants to hang Mordecai on that gallows. And so Esther, using her power as the queen, brings about the salvation of the Jews by allowing them to attack those who were about to attack them. Preemptive strike. And it says in chapter 9 what places were attacked. It says in chapter 9, verse 5, thus the Jews struck all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying, and they did what they pleased to those who hated them. At the citadel in Susa, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men, and Parshandatha, and there's several names there. I won't entertain you with my attempt to pronounce them all. But it gets down to verse 10, where it says, the 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Jews' enemy. But they did not lay their hands on the plunder. So what happened to the 10 sons of Haman? They were slain, they were killed, they were put to the sword, according to verse 10. Verse 11, on that day the number of those who were killed at the citadel in Susa was reported to the king. The king said to Queen Esther, the Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men and 10 sons of Haman at the citadel of Susa. What then have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now, what is your petition? The king is asking Esther, this is what's happened, this is what's done. What else do you want done? And she says, if it pleases the king, in verse 13, let tomorrow also be granted to the Jews who are in Susa to do according to the edict of today. And let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows. Two different things she's asking. She says, you've allowed the Jews to fight against their enemies today because this edict went out to destroy all the Jews, and this is going to take care of providing for the Jews' protection, but all the enemies are not done with yet. So please let us have another day of fighting against our enemies, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged. Now, in our culture, as we understand hanging, that's what you do with people who are still alive. You hang them in order to execute them. In that day and age, not necessarily so. If you killed an enemy and you wanted to display that he was dead and that you're stronger and that you've defeated them, and we want to scare people who would go the path that these folks have taken, you take their dead bodies and you hang them up. This is what happened to Saul. If you look at 1 Samuel, I got to get my history straight here. 1 Samuel chapter 31. Yes, verse 10, nearly the last couple of verses. Well, it is the last couple of verses of 1 Samuel chapter 31. Saul was dead and his sons, it says, they put his weapons in the temple of Ashtaroth and they fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan. He was already dead, but they drug his body back to their temple and fastened it up there so everybody could see it. And when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard that the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men rose and walked all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Bethshan, and they came to Jabesh and burned them there. They took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree at Jabesh and fasted 7 days. So it was common practice to hang bodies publicly, people that were already dead, so that others would see them and not rise up. They didn't have newspapers to publish news. They didn't have email. They didn't have Facebook. Bless their hearts, I don't know how they survived without Facebook. Twitter, nothing. They couldn't even pick up a phone and call people. So what they did was, let's make some news and let's make it with a bang. Let's take these guys that have been killed, in case anybody doesn't know. We'll bring their bodies back and hang them on this gallows that Haman had made to kill his enemies on. We'll put Haman's sons up there, and everybody will see that, and that's something people will talk about. That's news that will spread, and everybody will know, okay, don't lift up your hand against the Jews, because this is what happened to Haman and his sons. He was a powerful man, and it did not go well for them. Bob?
No, I'm talking about the first example of a cremation was when they cremated Saul, right?
It's the first one where it's written about.
Yeah,
No,
before that, there was one too. How about Sodom and Gomorrah?
well, that's a little different story.
Okay.
Good point. In other words, there were some who said that, all right, there's a contradiction here, because they were killed when they attacked those cities, and then it says they were killed when they were hanged. But when they were hanged, I believe they were already dead. There was a fellow by the name of Polycrates. He was a tyrannical leader, and his death was plotted by a guy by the name of Cambyses. Cambyses invited Polycrates in for a big feast, and in the process killed him, and then took his dead body and had it crucified publicly so everybody could see this is what happens to the enemies of Cambyses. But Polycrates was already dead when he was hung on the cross. So even in secular history, we see the same kind of thing happening. Well, man, I thought we would just have those two as introductory issues and go on from there. Does anybody else have anything that you've thought of or that you've heard about that you want us to discuss in class? Any possible alleged contradictions anywhere along the way?
About women preachers, I was asked that the other day.
Okay.
And I don't know what they were referring to, but I do know that the time of the women prophets and women preachers have been done away with.
Okay.
I've read that, I don't remember which. I think it's in the New Testament where there was a time for, certain things and they were done.
Maybe they were talking about Philip's daughters who prophesied and going back to Deborah, the time when Deborah was a judge in Israel. Okay. Who would be interested in taking a look at that next week? We'll get Bob to come in. He was saying this morning that he was going to be studying 1 Corinthians 14 and 15 in his class with the college age, and he said, I'm going to have my daughter read that part about women being silent. So So Leslie said, I'm be interested in hearing how that comes out. All right, anybody else have anything? Velda, do you have anything? Yeah. Bobby. Oh, you're fixing to be 70. So are you 74? He's not 74, is he? Fixing to be. So are you in your 74th year?
I'm in the 73rd, I'm 66, to go into the 74th.
All right. Bob? How many what? How many birthdays? Well, counting my original one. Oh, man. That's like, why do firemen wear red suspenders? Does anybody know why firemen wear red suspenders? To hold their pants up, yeah. Goodness. Well, time is up. Lord willing, we'll come back to some of these next week.